Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our discussion on investing in climate resilience to secure the homeland. My name is Kelsey Frazier. I'm a research associate at ADAC and a PhD student at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, where I focus on Arctic engineering studies. Today, I'll be the moderator for this conversation. Our talk today is part of Series 2 of the DHS Whole of Government R&D Showcase on building resilience and innovating equity. Before we get started, let me share a little bit more. So our discussion today will focus on how the climate crisis is changing the way we think about securing the homeland and protecting the well-being and stability of our country. In a country with diverse geography and population, where communities face compounding pressures, DHS understands there is a need to be coordinated in a multidisciplinary and multi-agency approach for combating the climate crisis. By focusing on research approaches and impacts, we want you to understand how S&T's research partnerships are working for you, providing communities the tools and information they need to build resilience capacity. With a focus on delivering transferable solutions, each of our presenters today is focused on making societal impacts to reduce disparities and build equity. Let me introduce you to our panel. First, we have Dr. David Alexander. He's the Director of Research and Partnerships at the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. Next, we have Randy Church Key, Major General, U.S. Air Force retired. He's the Arctic Domain Awareness Center's Executive Director, a DHS Center of Excellence here at the University of Alaska, and he's Commissioner with the U.S. Arctic Research Commission. Finally, we have Dr. Scott Lindsay, our Regional Director for the National Weather Service here in Anchorage. Thanks, everyone, for joining me. So our first question today starts with the idea that climate change is viewed by many as an existential threat of our lifetime. Threats to our public health, energy, agriculture, commerce, and emergency support functions make climate a top priority for governments across the globe. David, I'd like to start with you. So in the face of compounding pressures to build resilience equity, what impact does climate change have on securing the homeland? And how does this relate to the DHS mission?
Well, Kelsey, thank you. That was a great question. Disaster resilience and preparedness is a core mission of DHS. We have FEMA, our Federal Emergency Management Agency, our Cyber Infrastructure and Security Agency, the United States Coast Guard, and other agencies, all with responsibilities to protect our nation against current and emerging threats. This applies to known hazards as well as more chronic shocks and stresses and global risks such as climate change. While folks are more familiar with the impacts from climate change, such as sea level rise, or more frequent and more intense disasters, they are less familiar with the volatility that is resulting from climate change. Large swings in severe cold or heat spells, extreme heavy precipitation and drought events, and shifting population dynamics. Human settlement and development are at constant tension with natural systems and hazards. Changing global weather patterns, sea level rise, and cascading effects of climate change pose additional challenges to sustainability. These conditions increase the nation's risk and threaten our critical infrastructure and critical functions, have dire implications to food security, supply chains, economic stability, and public health and safety. In the Arctic, the implications of climate change are perhaps most acute. So not only are DHS assets and missions threatened by climate change, but also local communities and vulnerable populations, ultimately placing more people and assets in harm's way when disaster strikes. So DHS and S&T have an important role to play in addressing the climate change crisis, to keep Americans safe, to keep the nation moving forward, and to meet the department's core missions.
Thanks so much, David. Scott, let's get your perspective, please.
Thanks, Kelsey. Just an example of how this threat to communities impacts Alaska. A recent statewide risk assessment published in 2019 identified 29 communities at high risk for erosion, 38 communities at high risk for flooding, and 35 communities whose infrastructure was threatened by thawing permafrost. And when we refer to erosion in these places, which are largely off the road system, often accessible only by plane or boats, and with large Alaska Native populations, we're talking about 20 to 40 feet of coastline or riverbank gone in as little as a 24-hour period, threatening homes, roads, sewers, water supply lines, power lines, and landfills. On the other end of the spectrum, communities in Southeast Alaska, which is a temperate rainforest, recently saw 2 years of drought, which threatened water supply and hydropower production. We aren't talking about 50 to 100 years from now. These impacts are a fact of life for many Alaskans today.
Goodness. Well, thank you so much, David and Scott, for getting us started today. As climate change occurs, we're seeing different impacts to weather patterns and how people live. With intense storms and increased coastal erosion, as Scott mentioned, historic droughts, everyone is impacted. My next question goes to you, Church. So in a fast-changing world, climate impacts our health, economy, and security. What is missing in this conversation, and what don't we understand today, which can help inform future research?
Well, first of all, thank you for that question, Kelsey, and my compliments to my colleagues, David and Scott, for your remarks. I will share there's several aspects to consider. Number one, when you look towards knowledge gaps, you realize that right now so much is changing that traditional understandings, for example, of Alaska Native communities have had for centuries, are less relevant because, frankly, things are predicated, the assumptions they made that are predicated on past generation knowledge are no longer applying as in the Arctic region because the weather patterns and conditions on the ground are changing so rapidly. When you look at what a region in the Arctic that has an area that is largely rural and largely remote, sensing what's on the ground right now is sparse. And as a result, there needs to be a reliance on modeling and a need to leverage satellite information to help inform models because the region is so remote. The reason why this matters for all of America is because what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. The Arctic as a region is changing climate-wise at about 3 times a warming factor compared to the lower latitudes within the Northern Hemisphere. As a result, what's missing is really understanding what's happening on the ground at fine scale. And when we look at large trends, they're of course impacted by the aggregation of micro trends and fine scale data. So as you look to the future, what is needed right now is to better understand what's happening at fine scale, better understand what's happening where there's no sensing on the ground to actually record. And therefore, where you look to modeling and other characteristics of understanding what the current and really emerging trend lines are in the climate, you need to do so with the understanding that where we're at today is where there is a greater need for research to fill in the gaps because sensing and other means of technical collection are just not there.
That makes sense. Thank you, Church. I'd like to now discuss the concept of putting research into action so that you can understand how whole of government research partners are coming together to achieve common goals and help communities mitigate risks. So, David, we're going to turn back to you now. Can you speak how this aligns to what you're doing at S&T with engaging vulnerable communities? Knowing the frequencies and magnitudes of disasters are constantly changing and evolving, how are you innovating and mobilizing research to mitigate these risks? And what kinds of new approaches and investments are you making?
Well, Kelsey, DHS S&T is investing in a variety of institutional and applied research investments to address different aspects of climate change. For example, we have 3 university centers of excellence pursuing research toward better understanding climate-related risk. The Arctic Domain Awareness Center, led by the University of Alaska, the Coastal Resiliency Center of Excellence, led by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Institute, led by the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. We are also engaged in a research collaboration with the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on eco-friendly renewable energy-based disaster response vehicles to help reduce DHS's carbon footprint, as well as research into new eco-friendly additive materials to improve the strength and elasticity of water infrastructure to disaster shocks and stresses, including innovations in IoT smart sensors and communications platforms to improve and enable more effective and persistent disaster monitoring and early warning systems, such as low-cost flood and wildfire sensors. Additionally, we are looking to build resilience, capacity, and equity through a strategic research partnership with the National Science Foundation and the Department of Energy called the National Civic Innovation Challenge, more commonly known as CIVIC. CIVIC includes research into novel approaches to disaster resilience in areas such as financial preparedness, economic innovation, resilience education and training, and solutions to address compound disaster mitigation, to drive standards and solutions that are community-led. It is about meeting our stakeholders on their terms and delivering solutions that are community-driven, outcome-based, and sustainable.
Thank you kindly. That was very helpful. So we're going to pivot now to the Arctic region. Church, this one's for you. So while it's the least observed, the polar region, the Arctic polar region, is dramatically changing. Church, briefly, how do changes in the Arctic impact our national security and critical infrastructure? What's being done to enhance security and resilience?
That's a great question. Thank you for that, Kelsey. Several thoughts I'd like to respectfully present. Number one, the Arctic is a region, of course, that is critical to America's strategic security interests. It's a region in which competition among great powers is rising, and including the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China. And in responding to increased activities, because it is a diminishing ice environment where the effects of ice are lessened, access is easier, and therefore activity is increasing and is projected to continue to increase well into the future. Obviously, security interests are tied in some regards to what other nations are doing. Obviously, the Homeland Security is interested in what's happening that has a national security interest in a dimension that may affect the security of the homeland, to include the residents who live in the Arctic region of the United States, in the Bering, Chukchi, and Beaufort Sea regions. Being able to operate in this region, the United States Coast Guard, of course, is challenged as to providing a maritime presence that extends across the U.S. extended economic zones 200 miles from shore. Being able to do so with precision and understanding of what kind of operating environment this incredible force does on a day-to-day basis is quite important in order to reduce risk that they're facing and enabling decision makers to have the best armed understanding what the physical environment is doing, so therefore they can manage the statutory challenges that they've been authorized to conduct on behalf of securing the nation. That includes, of course, patrolling regions that are far-flung, remote, and really tough to communicate, because frankly, the means of transportation networks, communication networks, and more are simply not there. In order to reduce the impacts of malign activities that would include illegal harvesting of fishing, marine mammal harvest, illicit trafficking, and more, the Coast Guard's law enforcement mission needs to have understanding of what people are doing and what's happening across the region, so that, again, if they're called to respond either for law enforcement or the hand of help in search and rescue, humanitarian assistance, or disaster response, they can do so the least operational risk that they can conduct, that they can accommodate. So strategically for us, it is helping equip the decision maker with knowledge products, understanding, characterizing the weather patterns in support of through the aspect of innovation that supports National Weather Service, and reducing risk, increasing clarity of what's happening on the ground at fine scale, in order to allow these mission agencies that within the Department of Homeland Security the ability to prosecute their mission with the lowest acceptable risk levels and the greatest probabilities that their activities will result in mission accomplishment.
Thank you, Church. I want to jump off of a comment you said and go back to you, Scott. Would love to hear your insights on this.
Thanks, Kelsey. One thing that we're doing to enhance resilience in the National Weather Service is to invest in social science. And we expect that to help NOAA better identify requirements for these subseasonal and seasonal predictions as it pertains to climate change impacts, particularly for our underserved populations that include the Alaska Native communities. We're also exploring ways to diversify our Alaska workforce, and the best way to do that is to develop an interest in NOAA jobs in the middle school and high school levels. Getting students interested early will help them focus on the science, technology, engineering, math opportunities that we have in NOAA and in other agencies in Alaska. We want to create a pipeline to be able to hire Alaska Natives as technicians and hydrologists and meteorologists and oceanographers and social scientists. This not only adds diversity to the agency, but it also brings local and traditional knowledge to the agency to help us ensure that our services are providing what Alaskans really need from us. We'll continue to focus on improving our understanding of physical processes important in the Arctic's ice, ocean, and atmospheric systems. That understanding is critical to improve our forecast capabilities on seasonal timescales and beyond. Additional investments for observations are a key component to future modeling advancements. These improvements are critical to food security for our Alaska Native communities whose subsistence lifestyles threatened by climate change impacts to sea ice and permafrost degradation. Working with these communities to understand those impacts and their needs for information and environmental predictions is critical for increasing security and resilience.
Thanks so much, Scott. And thank you, everyone. So we're down to our last 1 or 2 minutes here, and I have a final lightning round question to pose to each of you. And that question is, what should everyday Americans take away when thinking about the value of research and science in addressing the climate crisis? So Scott, we're going to come back to you first here.
Thanks. We have more unknowns and fewer observations in the Arctic than in any other place, and climate change is impacting Alaskans right now. Also, what happens in the high latitudes has significant impacts on the weather and climate in the rest of the country. Our resilience as a nation depends on better understanding and forecasting of weather and climate, particularly in the Arctic. Continued research that can be turned into the weather, water, and climate services provided by NOAA will help us at the National Weather Service achieve our mission of protecting life and property. Finally, we can't do it alone. Only a whole of government approach will help us meet these challenges.
Thank you, Scott. And over to you, Church.
Thank you, Kelsey. Strategically, the Arctic Domain Awareness Center exists to support the United States Coast Guard in providing relevant research that helps them reduce their risk and improve their decision making. But we do so in partnership, and in a close partnership that includes a relationship with NOAA National Weather Service, because so much of what the Coast Guard relies on in operation response includes NOAA National Weather Service. So if our research can go to benefit NOAA National Weather Service as they support the U.S. Coast Guard for disaster response and humanitarian assistance, that's all to the good. So strategically, that includes modeling and enabling decision support systems that help operators understand the challenges they're seeing right at that fine scale in front of them, and to be able to leverage the power of science and innovation from a community of researchers that network across the United States and Canada. Bringing the power of innovation to bear through a hub and network approach that benefits NOAA, National Weather Service, and the U.S. Coast Guard in support of Homeland Security mission sets is important, and an opportunity for us as a part of the constellation of centers of excellence to contribute to relevant research that benefits the security enterprise of our homeland.
Thanks so much, Church. And David, we'd like to give you the final thought here.
So as Nobel Prize winning scientist William Nordhaus has aptly stated, when it comes to public good, collective action requires some kind of government intervention. Climate change is one of those challenges. For DHS, climate change poses challenges across our missions and toward ensuring a safe, secure, and vibrant nation. We need research and innovation to address the uncertainties and the future, and for citizens to be engaged, get involved, and participate with government in solving this important national challenge.
That was excellent, everyone. Thank you so much for your comments today. I wish we had more time, but this concludes the question and answer portion. For those of you watching, we do have a follow-up slide for you to learn more about S&T and ADAC's climate resilience research and our DHS showcase programming. So on behalf of Dr. Scott Lindsay at NOAA, Director Randy Church-Key at ADAC, Dr. David Alexander at DHS S&T, I am Kelsey Frazier from ADAC and the University of Alaska. Thank you again for joining our DHS Whole of Government R&D Showcase.